I'm Maria Shamkalian, the Vice Chair of Pennsylvania Film Industry Association, and we have a really great guest today, Todd Robinson. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
So happy to be here.
And we really appreciate it. And Todd has done so much, and Todd is not just a director, he is also a screenwriter and producer, and he worked with so many amazing stars. And I see Phantom over there in the background, and Phantom
self-promotion, cheap self-promotion. Yeah.
It's a fantastic film, and I look forward to hearing more. But the first question is always, how did you get started in this competitive and difficult industry to break into?
How far back would you like to go?
Oh, whenever that idea came up.
Well, you know, it's funny, but the way it all really began for me, the first seeds that were planted were really probably from my dad, who used to always drag me in as a kid and say, sit down and watch this movie. It's a classic. And that became a joke in our family because there was usually kissing involved. It was Casablanca or something. And I was just like, yuck. I wanted to watch monster movies and things like that. But as it turned out, my dad was right about pretty much every one of his recommendations, you know, from Orson Welles on. And eventually I came to love the films that he recommended. But what the first little taste that I got was there were two brothers, Rick and David Mortlock, who lived across the street from me and down a house. And they, on the weekends, would, in those days, I'm going to date myself by how old I am, but you could buy Super 8 movies or 8mm movies that were sort of reprints of monster movies. And so they would have a collection of the Mummy movies, the Wolfman, Frankenstein, and they were like 50 footers. So these movies, you know, literally played in like 5 minutes and it was over. And they would take these movies and would project them in their garage as a little movie theater and make popcorn and the whole thing. So we had our own little neighborhood movie theater. And after a while, they decided that maybe we should make our own movies. And my dad had the movie camera, so I was in. That's how I got in, because I had the camera. And in those days, we had these big floodlights, the exposure, it took a lot of light to get exposure on this old stock. And so we started making monster movies, and then we would play them on the weekends. And we basically learned how to cut in the camera because we didn't really have any way of editing. So they were pretty sketchy in terms of the way that they played, but this is really how we began to learn about narrative filmmaking and storytelling. And then I got sidetracked into music all the way through high school. And then I stumbled into the theater because there was a girl that I was really interested in who was a theater girl. And so I took a theater class, and it so happened that teacher, her name is Judy Roman from Pennsylvania, Rose Tree Media School District. And she was truly one of the best teachers I ever had in my life, because she made everybody feel, whether you were in the play, selling tickets, sweeping the floor, she made you feel like the most important person. And she gave me self-confidence at a time when I didn't have a lot. And so I was exposed to this world of lights and this sort of cacophony of different art disciplines, you know, whether it's scene design, painting, writing, singing, all of it came together. And I found my people. And so I switched from being a music major I was about to go off to college, and I switched and I became a theater major and went to a small school for a year in upstate Pennsylvania called Mansfield, and then transferred to Adelphi University, which was a true repertory theater experience. And that just really was the thing that set me on my path. And initially I thought it was going to be as an actor. I was trained as an actor, classically trained as an actor. And I didn't ultimately succeed at that endeavor. But what it did was it forced me to read all the great plays and analyze dramaturgy and consider all things that would serve me later when I decided I wanted to get into film. And so that's really how it began. And a couple of years later, there was another moment that was a true trigger moment for me. And it was during my college years, I had gone to do summer stock. I was a choreographer. I was a dancer. You wouldn't know it by looking at me now, but in those days I was a dancer, and I was also an athlete. So I sort of had a certain sort of power to my style, and so I got hired for a season to choreograph 4 musicals in Colorado, and they worked us to death. And I think we worked 6 or 8 weeks straight of nothing but rehearsal performance. And we finally got a day off, and I went to the movies. I just had to go do something. And I went to a double feature in this little tiny theater. And the 2 films were The Duelist and Days of Heaven, 2 of the most visually powerful movies to this day that I can even imagine. And I didn't know what I was seeing exactly. I didn't understand what this was, but I was so moved by these 2 films that I staggered out of the theater and said to myself, I need to do that. Whatever that is, I need to be part of that. And I think it was, I think at that time, I thought maybe I would be an actor in movies. But what ultimately happened was I came to LA and I fell into writing, which is another story. But once I found writing, I realized that I had power. I was at the cause of my destiny. Nobody can stop you from writing. They can certainly stop you from acting. I mean, you can take your classes, you can go to auditions, you can do those kinds of things. But in the end, you're waiting for somebody to say yes. With writing, I didn't have to wait for that. And if you do it long enough and have a little bit of acumen for it, you can get better at it. And so ultimately, that's what I did. And I started selling screenplays pretty quickly. And I think it's because my writing was informed by all of that experience that I had had from years of theater and acting and, reading, all of that. And the next thing I knew, I'm really sort of jumping around, but the first big break that I got was Ridley Scott agreed to direct my first big movie, which was a movie called White Squall with Jeff Bridges and many others. And that was really, what lit the fuse on my career. And Ridley really mentored me because he also knew I wanted to direct. So I stood at the hip of one of our greatest living filmmakers and watched how he did it.
Mm-hmm. I think it will be 2 questions in one. How did you transition into selling the scripts, from writing the scripts to selling the scripts, and how did you make that connection? Because it especially it was before it was LinkedIn and everything. So how were you able to reach out?
Well, there was another girl involved, I have to say. There's always a girl. So I was doing a play, a Pulitzer Prize winning play called Streamers in Los Angeles. I was an actor in it. And I became friendly with one of the producers. And we went out for coffee one night and we're just chatting. And I started to tell her this idea I had for a story. And I didn't even know really what I was doing. It was something that had come to me years earlier when I was living in New York, and I was looking for something to maybe create as a one-person show so that I could promote myself as an actor. But it was a historical story, and I was still passionate about it. So I told her the story, and I didn't realize it at the time, but what I was doing was I was pitching, mm-hmm. And I guess I had some ability at it because she was interested in it. She thought it was a good idea and recommended that I write it down. And she was working as an assistant at the William Morris Agency, as it was called at the time. And she's training to be a literary agent. And I didn't even know what a literary agent was, to be honest with you. I really didn't. And so she said, go write that down and bring it back to me. And I said, I'm not a writer. I'm dyslexic. I have terrible handwriting, terrible spelling. I can't really type. And she said, we can fix that. And so she went out and helped me, through a mutual friend of ours, borrow one of the original portable computers called a K-Pro computer. And it wasn't actually very portable, but it did have this wonderful thing that was called a floppy drive. And in the floppy drive, there was a floppy disk that you could put in, and it was a spell check. And between that and her willingness to proofread my stuff, it completely fixed those challenges that I had that made me doubt that I could ever do this. And so I went off and I did it. I wrote it, we brought it back and forth, and it eventually evolved into a documentary that took me probably 3 years to make. And at that point, I started selling screenplays, and every time I'd make a little bit of money, I'd go out and I'd shoot a little bit more. And I had a wonderful guy named Frank Q. Dobbs, who was a true journeyman director of photography, director himself, who was probably close to twice my age, but he took me under his wing, and my film school was making that documentary because I didn't even know which end of the camera to look through. I mean, I didn't know about exposure. I didn't know about lensing. I didn't know about camera movement, framing. I didn't know anything. And he, again, just worked with me. And over 3 years, we finished that film. In the end, he said, I didn't direct this, you did. So he basically forced me to take the credit. And it went on to be sold at Disney, and I won an Emmy for it. So that's just like a crazy, sort of, I don't even, non-linear freaking rocket launch of a career, to be that early on and be acknowledged like that. And from there, the punchline is that the woman who worked at William Morris became my wife. And so we've had quite a few productions together, including 2 kids that are both now in the business.
The main productions.
The main productions, yeah, the most expensive ones for sure.
Sure.
We just started down this road, and one of the things that I learned that was so critical for me anyway was that it takes a partnership to have, at least for me in the arts, to have a career, because it's so time consuming. It's so all encompassing in terms of where your head is all the time. I live with the characters that I'm working with at any given time, and I'm sort of off in this world, and I can be a little distant, and cut off, because you're always afraid that the idea is going to get away from you. And I have just an amazing partner who has learned very early on how to be tolerant of that, and give me that space and take care of things in my life that normally I would take care of, which, things as mundane as doing the bills, because it's just one thing that she would take off my plate so that I could continue to remain focused depending on what I'm doing. Now, this isn't all the time, of course, but when I'm in the throes of a project, it becomes pretty self-serving in a way, pretty focused. Mm-hmm. And to have somebody, and not to mention that, careers are one big sine wave, it's like this all the time. And, sometimes you're working, sometimes you're not. And that is something that you really have to get used to. But to have the 2 incomes really helped as well, because when I'm writing, especially when I'm speccing, I'm not making any money. And so how do we pay the bills? And she always maintained a full-time job through all this. And eventually, we ended up doing well, and, we didn't have to sweat it as much as we don't have to sweat it as much as we used to, but I couldn't have done it without her partnership and belief and all of that. So that's something that I think is important, is to try to find, someone in your life that is going to at least understand what it means to be married to somebody in this kooky business.
I love shout outs to the supportive spouses. I love to see such strong bonds in this industry. So it's
yeah.
Really
See, what's true. It's just true.
Yeah.
So.
The aspiring filmmakers, how do they go about pitching when they're just starting out? I see it's challenging enough even at the established level, but how do you start out?
Well, I think it's, when I was a little kid, or, you know, a kid. And my mom would drop us off at the movies. You know, she'd drop us off, get rid of us for 2 hours, and then come pick us up. And I can remember sitting in the back seat of the car with my buddies or whoever went to the movie, and we would start telling her what happened in the movie. So there was this guy, and he came over the mountain, and he actually came from inside this volcano, and he had all this superpower. And then there's this line. You remember there was that line where he says blah blah blah, and then that was natural pitching. You've seen something, you want to recommunicate the idea, you're excited about it. There's great lines that you want to reenact because it was such a great line, you know. And you think about, you know, the early Dirty Harry movies and the things that were just so quotable back in the day. Those are great. That's pitching. You know, you coming back and repeating those lines. I mean, you had Ronald Reagan repeating Dirty Harry lines during his campaign back in the day, you know, make my day, right? Well, that must be a pretty good line if you got a presidential candidate, you know, repeating it. So I think that that it's just good campfire storytelling. If you were going to tell a story to try to scare your campers when you're you're a camp counselor, and you got them around the fire and you want to tell a ghost story, how do you tell it? And that's really how you pitch with that kind of passion. Now, there are some rules involved, and I would say, and I've made a mess of most of them, but I think you got to try to get in and out, I would say, in 7 to 12 minutes, if you can. You want to tell it quickly. So, for instance, if I go into, I recently pitched a TV series with a partner of mine, Mark Harmon, and we went in and we set everything up in a way that, you know, he's kind of the big gorilla in the room. He's a big movie star or big TV star at CBS. There's me, you know, I bring what I bring, and then it was based on a book of a Navy SEAL. So he's got a true story. So now we've got intellectual property, we've got the content and the book and this real life guy that this really happened to. You've got Mark, who brings all the gravitas to it, and the network wants to please him because they want to keep him happy. And then there's me. And so what I do is I go in and I introduce everybody, and I Mark needed no further introduction, but Mark had a reason that he liked this book, and it was a personal reason. And so I would just say, hey, Mark, tell the story about your dad when he was in World War II and blah, 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 blah. And Mark told this story, and it was emotional for him. Now, the people watching, the network executives see, wow, this is really important to him. Then I introduce the Navy SEAL, and he tells the real story. And it just so happens that he wrote his book for the same reason that Mark's dad wrote his book 50 years before. And so now we've got a connection. And then they come to me, and then I go, let me tell you how we're going to do this. And then I tell them the story. And of course I've got, you know, foam core, and I've got artwork, and I'll take a bunch of things in so they can see that we've done our work. And then I usually have a sizzle reel that I end it with, and then so that they can get a sense of the tone of it. And then we try to get the hell out. We try to get out. We go, thank you very much for your time. We're not going to keep you any longer. And we try to run out of the room. And before you know it, they're like going, no, wait. We've got some questions. And we're like, okay. And we sit back down and they ask questions. And once they're asking the questions, we're no longer occupying their time. They're occupying our time. And that's when I know that I've got them a little bit, you know? So I try to set it up that way. So it's quick, it's impactful. There's visual stimulation to see. There's filmmaking involved, even if it's a sizzle reel. And I lay it all on the table and we say, thank you very much. Look forward to hearing from you, and get out before they throw you out. You know, because believe me, I've overstayed my welcome many times, and it's not good. So that's kind of the way I approach pitching.
And with a sizzle reel, it doesn't have to be the actors that you're planning to use. It could just be just the visual, visual to give an idea.
Yeah, I mean, what I'll often do is I've got an editor who's really, really good at this, and he'll read the script, or I'll have pitched him the idea and told him, what it's about, and then he'll go in and he'll mine movies for neutral scenes that express the ideas of the story we're trying to tell. I usually, and sometimes, you can't not recognize scenes from movies that you're familiar with. But I try not to linger. I always try to go over people's shoulders. I try not to look in the faces of these people because you also, I mean, you don't know, first of all, so and so may never be available for something like this. Um, you might offend somebody with an actor, like they just don't like that person. So I try to be neutral about it. And a sizzle reel, I try to keep, 2 minutes or less. I mean, it's truly a tone piece. It's not, to try to. It's not a trailer. It's just something that's going to give them a sense of the energy of it.
Interesting. This was fantastic practical advice. This is like communication 101 in the pitch room. This is amazing.
Yeah.
You really wouldn't think of this, that you try to switch the whole, focus, and it's not you, it's them who want you to stay. This is genius.
Well, it really is. It's reverse psychology.
Yeah.
I want them to want me to stay. I don't want them to want me to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And you can tell really early on. I've had people fall asleep in pitches. In fact, my last movie that came out this year, it actually came out. It took me 20 years to get this thing made. It's called The Last Full Measure. I invite everyone to go out and see it. It's a really good film. But in the beginning, my partner, Sidney Sherman, and I pitched it over 50 times. And I could not tell this story, true story. I could not tell the story in less than 30 minutes. I just couldn't do it. And we didn't sell it anywhere. I had to go off and spec the script. And once I wrote the script, then I sold the script in a bidding war, but I had to go out and prove it. I just wasn't a good story to pitch anyway, because there was too much nuance and detail in it. And it would have been better for me to just have gone out and written the script on my own dime to begin with, which is what I ultimately did. And then, people were fighting over it. So execution is critical. And you just sort of, I think television almost is a better thing to pitch anyway, because of the process, the creatives at the studios and the networks want to have creative input. It's not like you're going to come to them. I mean, it happens, but I think it's probably the exception, not the rule, that they come in and buy spec material. Again, this current situation notwithstanding, I have no idea what they're buying now. But what you're really trying to do is go in and say, if it's at a network, can you see 22 of these a year? Can you see that there's an engine here that can spit out stories, that many stories a year? If it's an 8-hour, what is the motor that's going to drive that? So, and the other thing you really need to do before you go in is you have to do your homework and really know who you're pitching to and what their needs are, if you can. And this is where, having the infrastructure in your career in terms of information gatherers in the forms of, everything from your agents, lawyers, to people on the inside that you might know in terms of, what a certain network is looking for next year. And by the way, I'm pretty sure they don't know what they want either. They're just looking around, looking at what else works, and goes, how do we make another Cabbage Patch doll? They don't really know it. And when things, happen spontaneously, it's usually because the idea was just so undeniably good. And again, that motor, they can see that motor is going to generate recurring drama over and over and over again.
And how much you mentioned pitching to television? How much should already be written by the time of the pitch? Should this whole season be written out? Should it be just a pilot? How
Generally, I don't. If you're pitching television, you usually don't write. I mean, I do the exercise work because I have to break down all the characters. I have to be able to tell you who they are, what they want, what their problem is. So I do a lot of that work, but that all is related through the pitch. It's not related in paperwork. A current pilot I'm working on right now, just because I've had the time, I decided to write the pilot just as an exercise to make sure that I could do it. I had the time, and so I sat down and cranked it out. Now I'm editing it, but I have no idea if that was a good use of my time. I think we all on my team, everybody likes where it's going. But I have no idea. Somebody could come in and say, yeah, we like the idea, but we want to be part of this. And so I'll have the option to, throw it over my shoulder and start over. But again, just because of the times that we're in, we're all sitting around, alone, not really doing a whole lot. So I had the time to do it. So I did it.
So with television pitch, you just go in with a synopsis and just general treatment of the show. You don't.
Yes. You what you want to do is you want to go in with the general concept of the show. You want to go in with maybe overall arcs for 3 seasons. Again, I'm speaking in terms of network. My most recent television experience was at NBC. So you're going to go in and you're going to say, okay, season 1, here's who the characters are. Here's who this person is, who everything revolves around. Here's what happens in the first year. Apart from, the true crime of it all, or what the week to week episodes are going to be like. What are the overarching problems or themes that are going to create dilemma, scene to scene, week to week, and then season to season. And usually you spend most of your time on the first season, a little bit on the second season, and then the third season, we're thinking about, we could go here for that. And that's how all this gets wrapped up. And if you get that far, then you can sort of reinvent the show. It's going to get reinvented, season to season anyway. So I want to have that knowledge. I want to know who the characters are, because it's all about, who are we going to cast? Who is an audience going to want to tune in week after week, or in terms of binging, hour after hour to watch it. And then, what is the context? What, again, are the given circumstances, the dramatic context? Is it Elizabethan England? Is it post-apocalyptic Earth? Where is it? What is it? What is the problem? Is it about terraforming a planet? Is it about, arguing over water rights in the West? Is it about, the themes that the Yellowstone is about, for example, about, the open range versus the cattlemen and all of that. I mean, what is the context? So obviously you need to know that. And then you sort of take it from there, and you need to be prepared to answer a lot of questions about your characters and the themes and so forth. So you better be really passionate about it. And by the way, you really need to be the absolute authority on the subject. And so I spend a lot of time doing this, and it also tends to direct what I'm choosing as subjects anyway. I happen to be a pilot. I'm passionate about aviation. If I'm going in on something and it's about, it's got an airplane in it, I promise you I know more than anybody in the room about it. And I make sure that they know that, so that they know that they're in good hands with somebody like me, because I literally have thousands of hours of personal experience doing those things on various levels. And I know military pilots, and I fly jets, and I do this and I do that. And so if they know that that's who's in the room with them, they're going to be far less skeptical about those things. Now they may be skeptical about, is anybody going to tune in and watch it? But they're not going to be skeptical about my ability to have command of the material. So, and you can do this with anything. I don't care who you are. If you're going to tell a story, a true crime story about, unraveling a murder that's based on a true story, know every detail. And don't tell every detail, but be prepared to answer questions about all those things, because you just don't want to get caught not knowing something, So that's kind of the way I approach it.
Yeah, that was a really great breakdown. Thank you. It's very helpful. You've mentioned the ups and downs. You've mentioned being in the mode. And for writers especially, it's so emotionally draining when either you have a writer's block or you just can't find time to sit down or something, because life happens. Sometimes you can't sit down right away and put it all down, or sometimes you sit down and it's not coming out because it's the wrong time to sit down. So how do you deal with these kind of situations as a writer?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually a dynamic question, because it isn't just one thing. They talk about screenwriting as a craft, and I think that really describes it well. It's a craft that occasionally, elevates itself to art, especially when you look at some of the great screenwriters out there like Aaron Sorkin or David Mamet, those kind of people, who just, I don't know, they just operate at a different level, and I don't know how they do it. But I do know that it takes a lot of discipline and work. I pretty much write every day. Mm-hmm. And that's on weekends too. I come down here to my office and I sit down and I stare at it. I can't really do it sitting on my bed. I can't do it sitting in a chair. I have to come down here into this sort of sacred space that I have, where I'm uninterrupted, and sit down and work on it. And it's not just sitting down and writing a story. It's, first of all, understanding the craft. It's understanding structure. It's understanding, deconstructing, and reconstructing character. And it's also about, for me anyway, doing a lot of exercise work, because writers write. There's something, I always say this, but there's something that happens between this and these that doesn't happen between this and this. It doesn't happen when you talk, but something that happens as this flow is going through your fingers onto a keyboard or through a pencil or a pen that puts you into an altered state where your unconscious begins to speak. You hear the muse, and it's often painful to get there. And you have to put yourself in sort of this alpha state where you really are in a different sort of elevated state of consciousness. And sometimes I have to artificially put myself there, and I'll meditate for 20 minutes. I'll just turn everything off and I'll turn on some white noise. And I have, a meditation exercise that I go through, and it just sort of stills everything. For me, my best writing time is early in the morning, before my brain starts to, I guess the left side of the analytical side of the brain starts to kick in and distract me. So the first thing is you have to work at it every day. It just doesn't happen. I have people tell me all the time, I wrote this screenplay in 6 days. And I go, it takes me 6 months, So, I mean, maybe you can, but I've never really seen anybody. The only person I've ever heard that actually pulled that off was Sylvester Stallone writing Rocky. And he sequestered himself and, kicked that thing out in a week or something. But he'd been thinking about it his whole life. So I don't even think that's probably even true. It's kind of a Hollywood legend. So the first thing is you need to have a process. You need to stick with it, and you need to do it all the time and stay sharp and develop. The other thing that you need to do is really what I alluded to before, I think, which is you need a support system around you that is safe. I talk often about this little metaphor about the mustard seed, and how, you find this little mustard seed and you look at it and you know that it has potential and you get excited about it. This is what I call that aha moment. You're driving in the car, you're in the shower, or someplace, that this little kernel of an idea bites you and you go, oh, wait a minute. And if you expose it too soon, like this little seed, most people don't even understand they have no imagination to be able to see the potential of what something can be. And this we'll get into pitching later, which is how do you communicate these ideas, which I think you kind of asked earlier. But if you show people this little seed, they'll step on it and crush it most of the time. They go, that's nothing. That's just this little thing. But what they don't realize is that if you love it, if you fertilize it, if you water it, if you let the sun grace it with vitamin D or whatever, that could grow into a redwood. Could also grow into a dandelion. You don't know. But usually that impulse, if it's coming from inside of you, it's probably leading you someplace where you need to go, because it's asking you to express something in your unconscious that needs to be told. How that's told, I don't know. But I know that I have this experience. And so early on, what I realized is I need to surround myself with people who are going to be encouraging and listen to me and understand, especially after all the years that I've been doing this. Usually when I come up with an idea, it turns into something. And those who doubted me early on don't really doubt me anymore. They'll ask a Socratic question, which is really more important if you are a creative executive. What you really want to do is you want to encourage a writer to do the very best that they can. And you do that by asking questions, not by telling them what you think. What you think about their idea is irrelevant. What matters is that you believe in them, and you're trying to ask them questions so that they can come up with clarity about what this thing might be. And that's useful. But it doesn't matter if it's in script development or people coming in and looking over your shoulder at a monitor on set. They have no idea what you're doing, and they start asking questions. Well, why are you doing that? Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And my answer is because I've spent the last year of my life thinking about where I'm going to put the camera. That's why. So do me a favor and go stand over there and don't ask me any more questions. And then you get into the editing room and you have a rough draft of your movie, which is called an assembly, which are almost always absolutely awful because they're supposed to be. You're trying to jam everything that you did in. You're defending things that you did that may no longer work. The really good producers and executives will come in and say, they'll ask you questions. What are you trying to say in this scene? What do you think about that? And if they ask the right questions, I'll always lead them to where they want me to go anyway. But I don't feel defensive about it. I don't feel attacked. But most people don't have any idea how to read an early draft of a screenplay, and they have no way of constructively criticizing a cut of a movie. The filmmaker will always get there. They'll always get there. And it's really sort of useless to me for me too, because lots of my friends ask me for opinions on their work, and I really try not to tell them what I think. I try to ask them a question to try to get them to better define what they think and what they're trying to do. So the second half of the answer, which is a long answer, is surround yourself with a very trustworthy, tight circle of people that you know are going to tell you the truth, but are going to ask questions rather than criticize what you're doing, because it can set you back, in a quantum way. And what you really need to do is move forward.
So when you put together the script, you already start with that perfect version that you think is just finalized and polished and ready to go. But writing is very subjective. And when screenwriter gives that script to a director, there's a chance of additional ideas or maybe different perspective. But when you're the director, This is where it ends. So how do you add that objectivity while filming, while you're very attached to that work of yours?
Yeah, it's another great question. You know, I've had the true privilege of working with some amazing directors like Ridley and Sidney Pollack and Shaker Kapoor, and some of these people I didn't even get to make the movie with, but at least I got to develop the movie with. And when you bring in people at that level, they're always going to make you better, because they are, again, trying to help them sharpen this thing, and they'll come up with a point of view about it, or for them it becomes personal, because why are they attracted to this story? Why do they want to tell your story? And that becomes a partnership. And when it's somebody who's great, it's usually, a blessing. When it's someone who's not so great, it's sheer hell. And so that's a problem, which is probably why at this point I direct almost exclusively my own work. There are two parts to that. One is, as a colleague says to me often, when people offer me scripts and I read it, I ask myself, how can can I help this? Is there something that I can contribute to this to make it better for whatever reason? And about 95% of the time, the answer is no. For me, I just I can't connect to it. Or there's tension, like the writer doesn't really want somebody to come in and reinvent their idea or whatever. So, and I understand it from being on the other side of it. But then when you actually have to direct your own work, I always say I have to fire the writer. And it's a tough thing, because rewriting, I've never had I've never had the opportunity of having a writer with me that, I walk in and I go, instead of doing that scene in the kitchen, look at this, let's adapt that into the scene. I always end up having to do it. So I never really get free of the writing completely. But really, a screenplay is not a novel. It's not a play. It's not sacred. You have ideas as a writer director about what you think the scenes are about, what's at stake for the characters. What happens, what do you want? How do you get it? What happens if you don't get it? You have to ask those basic questions. What are the given circumstances? And these are answers you need to have for the actors as well when you're directing these scenes. But you get there, now you want to give it away to the actors and have them embody these words, these characters, and make it their own, and reflect it back at you in a way that you never expected. And so it really becomes, again, a partnership between artists, where you give them everything that all the love and support you can. You walk them along the fence rail. Sidney Poitier once said, to me, actually personally, that actors are always working at the razor's edge of their anxiety. And you want them there. You want them to think that they're going to fall off, but you have to be there to catch them so that they don't feel foolish. And so if you can do that, you have a chance at a truly vulnerable performance, which is what we're always looking for, vulnerable and unpredictable.
And with the actors, when you're writing, do you already see someone in those roles, or are you, like you said, we don't know in the casting room? You're open to different faces, styles.
Yeah, I would say generally when I'm writing, with a few exceptions, I'm not really writing it with an actor in mind. I've written a few things for Ed Harris with him directly in mind, and he's done a few of them. But generally, there are sort of two levels of casting, and everybody knows this. This isn't like world-shattering information, but there's the part that has to get the film financed. And so, casting, and I'm not talking about smaller independent movies or horror movies or things like that. I'm talking about, movies where you're, many millions of dollars in. You have to figure out a way how you can at least create, the lie, if you will, that everybody's going to buy off on, that we can make our money back on this, which is almost impossible. Willful blindness is what I was about to say. But so you have to cast, and the financiers will, almost always demand that you have to have a certain amount of movie stars in the movie. And that's when you really start to have to rethink what you're doing, because who's on the list that can actually get a movie financed? It's actually a really short list. I mean, there might be, 30 men, 15 women, at any given time. Maybe it's more, maybe it's 40 men and 30 women. I don't know. It's changing, thank God. But traditionally that's kind of what it's been. And who are the people that you can put on a poster and people are going to go because they're in the movie? Now things are really changing now with Netflix and the way, our movie theaters are shut down and all of that. And it's hard to know what it's going to look like when we come out of the other side of this. But speaking from where I was a year ago, this time, before all this happened, this is probably what I would have said in terms of packaging a movie. So we know that we're going to have to cast some movie stars, and we go about doing that, and that takes money. You have to be able to make offers through their agents, and you're going to pre-negotiate those deals probably to some extent before they're even going to read the script. So you spend a lot of time chasing that. And it's very, you have to be clever about how you put these things together. Who is really attached? Will they attract other cast? It's very strategic. So there's that. Then there's the other half, which are the people that are more the journeyman actors and actresses. Am I allowed to say actress anymore? I can never remember. You're looking for people that can be real for you and fill the roles. And again, I'm looking to be fooled. I'm looking to have somebody walk in and just take it away from everybody else, where I can't not see it any other way. And generally those people, I can cast freely. But occasionally, like the movie star will have an opinion about somebody if they've got a scene with them. I've gotten into pickles about casting people that the star has an opinion about, and and I've already given the role to the other person, and I have to go in and fight about it now. So yeah, it's all challenging.
Yeah, I'm sure.
I beg them to learn the text without punctuation, without any meaning assigned to the words. Because if you assign meanings to the words, or if you are trying to play what you think the words mean, right now I have an action, and it's to convince you of something. And in order to do that, I can use my hands. I'm using my words. I'm using my inflection. I'm using my energy. But I'm not thinking about any of that. And I'm certainly not thinking about what words I'm going to say. What I'm aware of is that I'm trying to, exchange an idea with you, or convince you of something. And so in a scene, that's what the actor needs to know. The words will take care of themselves. And I can't tell you how many times, I've sat on sets where the actors are sitting in their chair, looking at their sides, learning their lines. And that's useless to me. And now I know I'm going to get a two-dimensional performance, because they're going to be thinking about the words, because they're tricking themselves. And I can tell you this also, having auditioned thousands of actors, one of the big boo-boos that you can make as a someone conducting auditions, is give them sides with punctuation, because 95% of the actors will come back and say, so listen, Susan, comma, the thing is, comma, blah, 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 blah. And they're playing the punctuation, and you realize that you have painted them into a corner of, and I can see the punctuation when they're saying it. Whereas really great actors will come in and they'll begin to speak, and you don't realize that the scene started. And it's because that's the way we speak in life. We don't wind up, we don't prepare, we don't begin, we just start to talk. And so I spend a lot of time, I probably spend, I don't know, sometimes 20 minutes with an actor, even if I know that they're not going to be in the film, because there's always going to be another film. And I want them to get comfortable enough with me in the audition so that it's really more like a working audition. It's almost like a rehearsal, so that I can get them to get that all out of their system, so that I can start to really see who they are. But if they're playing at something, they're never going to reveal themselves to me. I'm never going to really be able to see what they can do. So oftentimes, and it drives my casting people crazy, I really take a lot of time with people, because they've gone to their agent, they've answered the casting call, whatever. The agent has sent them the sides, they've memorized the sides, they've not slept the night before because they're nervous. They get up the next morning, they put their makeup and their clothes on, or they drive in. Now they got to sit in a room with a bunch of people that look just like them. And then they got to come in to this panel of experts, right? And the truth is, and don't tell anybody I said this, but we don't know what we want. We don't really know what we want. All we know is we want something amazing. We want to be amazed. How do you amaze somebody? I don't know. I think it has to do with being truly comfortable with who you are, and not putting a whole lot of power into, the only way to measure success today is for me to get this gig. I don't think that's the way you should measure an audition. I think it should be, I formed a relationship with those people. I think that's really far more realistic, because there's only one person going to get the job, but there are lots of jobs over the years. And so anyway, once again, I've sort of like gone way down the path of no return, but
actors will really appreciate this guidance. So
yeah, well, it's all connected, and that's all connected to the writing, because I can tell you, when earlier on in my career, I would pick my favorite scene in the movie and I go, yeah, have them read this. And by the end of it, I would hate the scene. I would just loathe it, because the scene has been ruined for me by my own punctuation. And now when I give out sides, I ask my casting people to strip out all the punctuation. And I would say to actors, if you're preparing for an audition, first of all, come in with the damn lines memorized. It means so much to the filmmakers if you've taken the time to learn their words. It shows respect, whereas if you're coming in and you're faking it, and now you're reading, and trying to make contact, it's almost impossible. But what I say to do is, if I were still an actor, I would take the sides and I would get on my computer and I would retype them. No capitalization, no punctuation. That's it. And then I would do the same for my cues, because you got to learn the cues, right? And I would memorize it like that. And then I would memorize it. I would stand on my head. I would get on my Peloton. I would do whatever, I can do that has nothing to do with this scene, and just run the lines, so that I can say, my liege, I did deny no prisoners, but I remember when I was dry with rage and extreme toil, breathless and faint, leaning upon my sword, came there a simple lord. Okay. Henry IV, part 1, Hotspur. That was an audition or a class exercise that I did 30 years ago or something. I learned that speech and I know it inside and out. And now I can repeat that to you, and I can fill that with any intention or any moment to moment energy that's happening between us that I want, that actually exists. And that's real communication. That's what you want the camera to see, not my line, your line, my line. I'm angry, you're sad. You're laughing, I'm angry, you're sad. That's not what we're trying to do. What we're trying to do is have a spontaneous exchange of energy. you know, and that's called moment to moment acting or communication. You've done all your other work. You know what your beats and blocking are that have been discovered in rehearsal, that all have to do with what you need, your verbs, your actions, all of those kind of things. That's all structure. But if all of that is committed, truly committed to memory, and then when you walk onto the set or you walk onto the stage, you're not thinking about anything. You're not thinking about any of that. You've already done that work. Now I'm looking at you, you're looking at me. And when I feel it's time to speak, I will. And when you find that you feel the need to speak, you will. And that's how we go through life. And we're trying to get to some assimilation of that. So that's kind of what I'm looking for.
Are you comfortable with actors ad-libbing? Do you give them that opportunity, or you want them to strictly stay with the words, just their own interpretation?
It depends who it is.
Okay.
You know, I mean, as you mentioned, I've worked with some of the finest actors alive. And if somebody like that has an idea, again, if what we're really trying to do is express an idea and execute a need and try to get something in a scene, everything's a negotiation. Then the words, on the one hand, don't really matter, do they? But on the other hand, if David Mamet wrote these words, do you really think you're going to write better words than him? You know, I would respect the words and try to work through the words. That's what I would encourage. That being said, the other wonderful thing about actors is I often use the analogy of a conductor of an orchestra. You know, as the director, you're conducting the orchestra, and so in front of you, you have the libretti. You have all the parts. You've got the strings, and you've got the woodwinds, and you've got the brass, and you've got percussion, and you've got it all. And as you're conducting, you know, and you're turning the page, you're looking at this big thing. The oboe player will know if you made a transition that the fingering of the oboe will not make easily. Or if it's been written in a key that's not good for a given instrument, they will be able to tell you this isn't working, and you can adjust it. Actors are like that. They're really playing something that is linear, whereas the filmmaker is looking at something more sort of stacked, if you will. And they will catch you. And if you've made a problem for them with a transition, William Fichtner is a friend and an actor whom I just love. And he often will stop and say, I'm not sure how I make the leap from this to this. Can we talk about it? And then we sit down, and then the writer comes out, because the writer's the guy that's got to fix it. So that's why I can never really quite get rid of me, you know, but they're almost always right. And Bill is consistently right. And so, but can we fix the text, or do we want to just improvise? Now, when I look at, say, Martin Scorsese, and I look at De Niro's early work, he's improvising. You know, that whole thing from Taxi Driver, You Talking to Me, that whole thing is clearly improvised. But he's so clear about the truth that, again, the words don't really matter. And he does that a lot, De Niro, where he would repeat a line. And every time he repeats the line, repeat. Wait, are you? And the intention is changing all over the place, and it's filled with emotions that are changing second to second, moment to moment. And Marty is smart enough to know that that's gold. So, you know, how can you argue with that, right? So I guess I haven't had the opportunity to direct somebody in a role that is spontaneous in that way, dangerous in that way yet. But if given that opportunity, I would roll with it. The other thing to just know about improvisation is that it does create hell for you in the editing room, because the way that the pace of a film is ultimately created is through editorial. It's why we don't. It's why the 2-shot can be the kiss of death. We always go to a 2-shot if we're out of time during the day and we don't go to the coverage. But if I'm in a slow push and I'm doing a 2-shot where 2 actors are speaking, I'm now locked into the rhythm of the scene. And I have no idea on the day that I'm shooting it if that rhythm is going to serve the actual rhythm of the whole film. So now what do? I'm kind of stuck with it. So when people improvise, rarely are you going to be able to match it in coverage, so you just have to know that that you're going to paint yourself into cul-de-sacs with improvisation. So yeah, and of course I'm not talking about comedy either. I'm a drama guy, so I do drama. So so that's probably a really confusing answer, but of a little bit, mostly no, but a little bit yes.
That makes sense.
I'll tell you this about the editing room, and there's this thing called test screenings, and I used to be terrified of test screenings. I've got the cut where I want it. I don't want any more input. I just want it to be great. And what you realize is that what you intend and what people experience are different, especially because you're completely biased by the experience of making the film, the experience of writing it, editing it, all of it. And then you put it in front of an audience, a test audience. And, this is another piece of information you might want to share, but nobody really knows how to look at unfinished work. And rarely will people, almost never will people who know you tell you what they're really thinking, because they want to please you. They've got stakes, they're engaged on some other level, or they're money people and they're terrified they're not going to get their money back. Everybody's got an ulterior motive. The only people that will tell you the truth is a blind audience that doesn't know you and doesn't know you're in the audience when they're doing the Q&A afterwards. They'll tell you the truth, and they give you a chance at reinventing the story and making it better. And I'll give you just a quick example. When we were doing The Last Full Measure, I went in, and the first time we tested it, I think we did like a 56 score, and a 56. The mean average for a Hollywood movie is about between a 50 and a 52. So we had done a little bit better than average. But there were lines, there were people that they were confused about things. And I realized, well, there's a laugh here, and they're laughing over the next line. And so they're missing the line. So now they get confused. And so if I just go in and add 8 frames so that they stop laughing, so that they can hear the line, beep, the score goes up. So we did this 3 times, and we went from a 56 to an 86 to a 98 score, unheard of, but that's because they were willing to pay $27,000 for a test screening of 250 people. I got to get the feedback, go back to the editing room with my editor and recut it and make these little adjustments. Did it ultimately change? Was there anything big? No, it was all tweaking. So that's how you get solid input, not from people. So I would say to any filmmaker, even if it's a small independent film, if you can set up a blind screening for people that you don't know, and are brave enough to let them look at the movie and tell you what they think of it, and then go back, you'll have the opportunity to improve it over and over again, because you just can't know. You just can't know in the beginning.
Wow.
So
that's a really great example. Like some minor things like that laughing over a joke can block a big important piece of information. Wow. Things you really don't think about.
Yeah. And there are other things where the audience will kind of resent the filmmaking because they already know you made the point and now you make it 3 more times, or you linger in the scene too long. It's like, it's the old adage, get in as late as you can, get out as soon as you can. Get to it, get out. Because filmmaking is about, it's about what we call nonlinear acceleration. And what that means is that you have this container that is the environment of the movie. And in that movie, or in that environment, you have an actor who, if you're tracking the hero's journey, will begin with refusal of the call. Think of Luke Skywalker in the original Star Wars, right? You should join the what is he joining? Come and join the Jedis with me, says Obi-Wan Kenobi, or whatever he says, the rebellion. And Luke says, I can't join the rebellion. I got to get back. My uncle's going to kill me, right? And he's chased these droids out there. Well, he goes back. His uncle's dead. His family's been murdered. Bang. He says, I want to go with you to Alderaan. Now he's jumping into the unknown world. Where does he end up? In that crazy bar. Right? Nothing could be stranger and more unusual than that place. And everybody's pushing him around, and he's like, where am I? How did I get here? That's the beginning of the unknown world, where you meet, helpers and tricksters and, all kinds of people along the way that are ultimately going to lead to your transformation, so that when you come out the other side, you have what we call treasure or human knowledge. And that knowledge you're going to bring back to the known world that you left and share. And that's really the structure of movies. But within that context, and the reason that editing is so important is it's nonlinear. You look at a Quentin Tarantino movie, you can jump all over the place. I mean, look at how out of time Pulp Fiction is. You're all over the place. Look at The Usual Suspects. You're all over the place. You've got a device, which is a storyteller, and that's an event like the interrogation in The Usual Suspects. And now that guy's taking you all over the place in and out of time, the Kevin Spacey character. And by the end, you realize, what the punchline is, which was, it was all right in front of him. And he just wrote it as he was going so he could get out of that room. That's all that movie's about, is him getting out of that room. And so, and the guy that really has the aha moment is the cop who's interviewing him. He goes, I just was had. He says, I'm smarter than you. He's arrogant. And so what happens? He gets schooled, and that's the moral of that story, So this is the beauty and the power of filmmaking, because you can have these moments of, again, what I call nonlinear acceleration, where you have epiphany in a moment. And what is the epiphany for Luke Skywalker? Luke, I am your father. What? That's called peripeteia, anagnorisis and peripeteia from Aristotle's Poetics, right? I See Dead People. What's that movie called?
The Sixth Sense.
The Sixth Sense. Speaking of a great Philadelphia filmmaker, right? In that movie, anagnorisis is, I'm helping this kid. He sees dead people, or he thinks he sees dead people. How weird is that? And then peripeteia, I'm dead. Boom. Right? So Bruce Willis goes into this unknown world with this weird kid who sees dead people. And then he pops out the other side, realizing he's dead, and he's got to help his wife let go of him. And that's the knowledge that he brings out the other side. And so he grows, and he can go on to wherever he needs to go on to, because he's lingering, he's haunted. And what you realize is he thinks that he's helping the kid, but the kid is really there to help him let go. But the kid, because he's wise, realizes that he has to learn it for himself, just like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz. I should have thought of it for her. Oh, she couldn't. She had to learn it for herself, right? These things are repeated over and over and over in movies. So that's why they work. And that's why it's a powerful medium that we keep returning to over and over again. So
there is a formula you have to follow.
Well, I wouldn't say that you have to follow anything. Again, like, that's really rigid. I'm just saying that if you use these things as tools for analysis, you'll see commonality in it. And the power and the excitement of how you write and structure and edit a film exists in a way that it doesn't exist in the real world. And that's why you can take 90 minutes and transform an audience by putting this collage of events and happenings together. If you recognize that there is structure to it, which I would say is different than a formula. A formula kind of, you don't want to have to chase something like a formula. What you need to understand is that there's a structure that, since, again, Aristotle, has been working pretty well. And so I think it's incumbent upon us as storytellers to understand it, recognize it, and when it's appropriate, apply it. Every time I start a new project, I feel like I don't know anything. Wow. I have to start over. I have to humble myself, because it
never comes to you that you feel like, okay, now I'm it. Never comes.
No way. No? It really doesn't. And that's what keeps it interesting too, right? Because if you just knew it, you'd be bored out of your mind. But it's so challenging, at least for me, with all of the things that come with it. Every time you make a new film or a new TV production, it's a whole group of people who have their own experiences and their own ideas. And so, knowing what I know what I know, but I don't know what I don't know. Mm-hmm. And so what I try to do is to be open to that, because, the real secret to being successful in this business is to surround yourself with people who are smarter than you are. It really is. And that's why the people skills come together. And try to be, humble in the face of that, because, if you're the filmmaker, your name is going to be on the movie. You're going to get to do media Q&A, you're going to ultimately get the credit anyway. It's far better to give that credit out to other people, to share authorship with them, and to try to create this circle of people that are going to, work with you for years. That's really what you want to do, is develop together. You don't need to go and work for established filmmakers. What you need to do is establish your own group of people that you're going to travel through time with, Yeah.
Nice. Thank you. That's what we're trying to do here. We're helping also people to network and create art and encourage them and organize. Used to, back in the days before COVID, organize live events.
Yep.
People would get together, exchange contacts, and collaborate, and create work for film festivals. And just,
right.
You have to keep on doing things. The challenge is, of course, always the budget. It's that bridge where, until you establish yourself, you can't get funding for your films, but you can't keep on asking family and friends for those 50, 100 grand. It also gets overwhelming for them. So that creates a challenge for this aspiring filmmakers. So they're all trying to find the way to jump. And what I've noticed through these webinars is that everybody has a completely different story of how they made that jump. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting. That's why at first I was thinking, well, I interview a couple of directors, a couple of producers, a couple of screenwriters, and then what else is there to learn if it's all the same? Completely different. Everybody's completely different. And it's just, that makes it so interesting, because as people are watching these webinars, everybody can find, even if not in person, but their mentor to look up to and think, well, look at that path. I can do that. And it helps. I think it helps. I've gotten something.
Yeah, I think so too. I think the main thing is you got to stay in the game.
Yeah.
You got to stay in the game. And all those connections are fine. But in the end, I don't think that great art, that great skill will go unnoticed. Mm-hmm. There's a ton of bad stuff out there that you got to wade through. They're not sending me the same scripts they're sending, whoever, Steven, I'm not getting those scripts. I'm getting, a whole different level of stuff. And most of that stuff is not great, and that just has to do with, who I am, where I am, whatever. I'm not complaining. It's just a fact. But I'm still here. And I never gave up. I never, ever, I've had my moments, but, I was just always determined to be part of this, to be part of this world. And if you do that, I'm not saying that you're going to become a successful director or a screenwriter, but you might find a different home. You know, I started out as an actor, and I was as driven as anybody you'll ever meet to become that thing, to become an actor. And you know what? That acting thing led me to a fork in the road. And it led me to the place that I actually would choose to go and probably needed to go, because that's really where my gifts lie. It wasn't in acting, but going down that acting road prepared me for the other one. So you never know, but you got to dive in. You got to be in the pool. You know, you got to be treading water in that pool. Maybe you find out you're a swimmer. Maybe you find out you're the lifeguard. I don't know. You know, I mean, you can mix all the metaphors you want, but you got to stay in the game. And if you don't have that appetite for it, I would say don't waste your time, because you won't get the time back. You know, my kids are both in it, and they've watched my wife and I, go through, part of a lifetime doing this, and they're pretty realistic about it. And they've chosen to do slightly different things than us, because things change. My son loves anime, and he's been totally affected by gaming and that kind of storytelling. I mean, you talk about nonlinear storytelling, all of that is entirely different. I don't even understand it, So and my daughter's, gone into publicity. She started out as a producer, and she's found her now. She finds herself as working for a big publicist. So you just never know where it's going to take you or how satisfying that's going to be. But you got to be there to do it, and maybe fail, to find out, where the path of least resistance is. So
I mean, if that's yours, you can't not be there. You just feel incomplete.
Yeah, I think so.
And you're originally from Pennsylvania.
I am.
Had any chance to film in Pennsylvania?
I've never had the opportunity to film in Pennsylvania, but one of the very first screenplays I ever wrote was called The Growing Season, and it was all designed to be shot in Brandywine, Pennsylvania. And all of my friends are still back there, and I love Pennsylvania. And if my wife wasn't from Texas, I would probably move back. I really miss it. The older I get, the more nostalgic I get about it. It's such a beautiful place. So yeah, I love Pennsylvania. And I notice from your website that you guys have done a great job discussing the sort of economic potential and impacts through your tax credits and all of that. And it looks like PA is being aggressive about that. And I think that's good.
Thank you. We're trying. We would like to bring more film work to PA. I think we've got a lot to offer. And we hope that more established, fantastic filmmakers like yourself can come and work with us here. Hopefully sometime.
I would love to.
Thank you. Looking back to this very successful path, what would be your three pieces of advice, or maybe 3 mistakes to avoid, or lessons learned that you can share with those who are just at the beginning of the path?
Well, limiting it to 3 things is,
you can go with more.
No. I'm just saying it's a little bit dangerous and limiting, because there are a lot of things. But, I think the first thing to remember is that in life, we're not really doing what we think we're doing. You think that you're going in as a young filmmaker or a young actor. You think that you're going in and it's all about you getting the job or being in a movie or making a movie or something. But when I teach, my students come in and they think that they're in a film class, but they're not. They're really in a life class. And I'm the only one who knows that. Because what I'm really teaching them is, I can teach them about cameras and about storytelling and about this and about that. But what I'm really there to do is teach them people skills. I'm teaching them team building. I'm teaching them to be kind to each other. I'm teaching them how to get the best out of people, whether they ever end up in the film business or not. I want to make sure that when they come through my class, they got something of value for their money. And maybe it's the mechanics of filmmaking, but I'm going to make sure that that I'm sharing other life lessons with them, and that's sort of the subtext of my classes when I teach. So that's something. So when you go into an environment where you're trying to sell something or get something, I think you need to take a 10,000 foot view of what you're really going in to do. And as I said earlier, the goal shouldn't be to sell the story. I mean, of course that would be wonderful, but what you're really going in there to do is to make a connection with somebody and get them to remember you, and and invest in them. I always ask questions when I go in. I'm like, how are you? How did you get into this business? A lot of times I turn the interview around, especially at this point in my life, because I'm older. And a lot of times I'm talking to people who are younger than me, and I'm interested in people. That's why I'm a storyteller. So I often do what you're doing. I ask them, well, how did you get here? Why do you love this? What do we have in common? And so, that's one thing that I would say is important. The other thing I would say is, quitting absolutely guarantees failure. Not quitting, while it doesn't guarantee success, it does guarantee that you won't fail, right? So you can't quit. And if you're in this business, I don't believe in parachutes or backup plans or whatever. I was cut out for this and this alone. I keep saying, if the apocalypse comes, the tribe is going to eat me first, because there isn't much else I can do. I can't get water out of the ground. I don't know how to grow food. I'm not really that useful. But it's because I put all of my time and effort into creative pursuits. And hopefully that's useful because the subjects that I pursue are meaningful social ideas that hopefully you can come away from and learn something from. And it takes me back to the films that I love the most. They're all films that I feel that I've been able to claim as my own because they spoke to something personal in me. And that's the beauty of art, right? We get to claim it: a song, a painting, a film. If it speaks to you, it speaks to you. And that's why I never really get too wrapped up in what a review says, because that's just one person's opinion, who is probably writing about themselves anyway. But I get letters and communications pretty regularly about all of the films that I've made, because for somebody it's their favorite film ever, and what you realize in time is that that's really who you were making your film for. And that leads me to one other thing that I was thinking about earlier today in preparation for this, and that is that I've had to learn and accept that I have limitations. There are certain things that I do well, and there are other things that are probably out of my realm, out of my grasp. I could probably learn about them, and maybe I could write a story about an accountant or or a brain surgeon, but I would have to do so much work to understand like medicine, to be credible at it, to be that authority that I was talking about. And as much as it would have been nice to have had Steven Spielberg's career, or George Lucas's career, or Francis Coppola's career, I have my career, and I've been able to do what I've been able to do based on who I am and whatever gifts that I might have had or interests that I might have had that I've explored through film. That's what I've been able to do. And if you try to, I'm not saying that you shouldn't develop and get better and have a sort of a universal interest in topics. I think you should, but you can't do everything. And I probably, if I had, I don't know if it's a regret, but I think maybe there have been times when I've gotten a little bit scattered and tried to do too many things and tried to say yes to too many things, as opposed to recognizing what I'm good at and being the best at that. So that, I would say that's the third thing is, get comfortable with who you are, what you do well, and be the very best at that. And I think you can have a career.
Thank you. That's inspiring. And to end this fantastic webinar with a lot of really practical advice that really opens your eyes to this industry, whom would you like to nominate to send the elevator back down and also help aspiring filmmakers make it where?
Well, I'm going to recommend my friend Penn Densham, who I think is he's a wonderful director. He and writer. He and his partner, my friend John Watson, have produced some fabulous films, including Robin Hood with Kevin Costner, Backdraft, Blown Away, Moll Flanders. Some really wonderful films, and Penn is a wonderful teacher. He's written a wonderful how-to book called Riding the Alligator, and yeah, I'm gonna reach out to Penn and see if we can get him on your air.
Thank you, I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your sincerity about some challenges and maybe some steps that need to be taken. I'm sure that our viewers have learned a lot, and I really hope that we're going to see their films on the big screens one day.
Me too.
Thank you very much, Todd.
Thank you so much. All the best.
Thank you.